The old man behind the counter stopped breathing. Not figuratively, not in the way people say someone lost their breath when they see a pretty sunset or a surprising credit card bill. He actually held his breath, both hands flat on the glass display case, like he was trying to keep the whole shop from tilting sideways. His fingers were spread wide, pressing into the glass so hard that the tips turned white. The cat, sleeping on a stack of oversized atlases near the register, opened one eye, slow and suspicious, like even she knew something had shifted in the room. He looked at me, then back at the map, then at me again. "Where did you get this?" "From my grandmother," I told him. "She just passed. Left me her collection." He closed his eyes. Not a blink. A full, deliberate close, the kind of thing you do when you're trying to hold something inside your chest that wants to get out. When he opened them, his voice had changed. It was quieter, careful. "Do you have any idea what you're holding?" I didn't, not yet. But I was about to find out, and when I did, it would unravel everything I thought I knew about my family, my grandmother, and the man who married my mother when I was 10 years old. But I should back up. Because 3 days before, I was standing in that narrow shop on King Street in Charleston watching a 69-year-old man have what appeared to be a medical event over a hand-drawn map. I was standing in Magnolia Cemetery watching my stepfather throw my dead grandmother's atlas into an open grave. The funeral was small. My grandmother, Eleanor Ashby, died of heart failure in her sleep on a Wednesday, March 5th. She was 82, 40 years as a history and geography teacher at Wando High School. The kind of woman who remembered every student's name, kept peppermint candies in her desk drawer, and could tell you the history of any street in Charleston without pausing to think about it. She once corrected a tour guide on Meeting Street, gently, with a smile, and the guide thanked her for it. That was Eleanor Ashby, sharp until the very end. Sharp and quiet and meticulous in a way that made the rest of us look like we were stumbling through life with our maps upside down. The pastor read from Psalms. There were maybe 30 people standing under the live oaks, their branches draped in Spanish moss that hung so low it almost brushed the tops of the folding chairs. The air was thick, the way March air gets in Charleston, warm and heavy and smelling like jasmine and damp earth. Neighbors were there. A few retired teachers who still called her Miss Eleanor, even though she'd been married for 40 years. My best friend Jess, standing just behind me with her hand on my shoulder. And Glenn Mercer, my stepfather, standing across the grave from me in a charcoal suit that probably cost more than 2 months of my rent. The man wore a $900 suit to a graveside service and still managed to look like the regional manager of a storage unit franchise. Some people just carry that energy no matter what they put on. His black Lexus GX was parked on the cemetery road with the engine still running because God forbid Glenn Mercer walk an extra 40 feet or let the air conditioning take a break. When the pastor got to the part about personal bequests, he said it simply. Eleanor had asked that her collection of antique maps, atlases, and geographical works go to her granddaughter, Nora. That's me, Nora Ashby, 29 years old. But we'll get to that. The look on Glenn's face when the pastor said it. It wasn't just annoyance. It was something faster than that, something that flashed across his features and then got swallowed whole, like a fish taking a hook beneath the surface. If you've ever seen someone slap their pocket to check for their wallet, that quick little jolt of panic, it was like that. But he buried it fast. What he didn't bury was his opinion. He walked over to the folding table next to the flower arrangements where Grandma Eleanor had specifically asked for a small display of her favorite maps and atlases at the service. That tells you everything about who she was. Other people want roses. Eleanor Ashby wanted cartography, and Glenn picked up 3 of them. Just grabbed them by the covers like they were old phone books, and he tossed them onto the casket. They landed with a sound that I will hear for the rest of my life. A flat, papery thud against polished wood. "Bury this trash with the old woman," he said, loud enough for the whole cemetery to hear. "These maps don't lead anywhere anymore." Then he brushed his hands together, actually brushed them together, like he'd been handling something filthy, and walked back to his Lexus, which was still purring on the cemetery road like a loyal dog waiting for a terrible owner. I stood there. Everyone stood there. 30 people and a pastor in the humid Charleston air, and nobody said a word. The Spanish moss didn't even move. I want you to hold that image. A grown man at a funeral throwing maps onto a coffin because we are going to come back to why he did that, and the reason is going to make you sick. Aster here. Welcome to my new story. Now, let me tell you who I am, because it matters. It matters because Glenn Mercer looked at me across that grave and calculated exactly how much I was worth, and he got it wrong by about $275,000. My name is Nora Ashby. I'm 29 years old. I work as an administrative assistant at a small law firm on Broad Street in Charleston, which sounds more impressive than it is. I mostly file documents, answer phones, and argue with the copier, which jams every single Tuesday like it has a personal vendetta against the start of the work week. I make $34,200 a year. And I want you to remember that number because it becomes important later. I live in a studio apartment on Meeting Street. Rent is $980 a month, water included, but the radiator only works when it feels like it, which in Charleston is basically never when you actually need it, and always at 3 in the morning in July. I have one chair at my kitchen table. One. I keep meaning to buy a second one at the Habitat Restore on Upper King Street, and I keep forgetting because that's the kind of person I am. The kind of person who eats cereal standing up and forgets to buy furniture. I owed $683 to Coastal Federal Credit Union on a 2018 Honda Civic with a scratch on the rear bumper that I kept telling myself I'd fix next month. Next month had been going on for about 14 months. My phone buzzed every morning with a reminder from the credit union, polite but persistent, like a debt collector who went to finishing school. Your payment is past due. Further action may be taken. Charming. That's who Glenn Mercer was looking at when he threw those maps. A 29-year-old woman making $34,200, driving a scratched Civic, eating cereal standing up. He saw someone who didn't matter. Someone who would take whatever he offered and be grateful for it. Here's what you need to know about Glenn Mercer. He married my mother, Diane, when I was 10. My mom was a nurse at MUSC Health who worked double shifts and still somehow made it to every school concert. She could fall asleep standing up in the break room and wake up smiling when her pager went off. She was the toughest person I ever knew, and she died of lung cancer 3 years ago. She was 56. Glenn remarried 9 months later. A woman named Connie who lasted 16 months before she apparently figured out what the rest of us already knew. Now, he lives alone in the house he bought with my mother's life insurance money, runs a commercial 45-plus rental units across Berkeley County, and sits on the town planning commission because apparently you can just do that if you donate $6,000 a year to the volunteer fire department and get your name put on a bench at Waterfront Park. A bench, like he founded Charleston. Every time I walk past it, I want to stick a Post-it note on it that says, "This man is terrible." But I'm told that's technically vandalism. My grandmother, Eleanor Ashby, was the opposite of everything Glenn pretended to be. She didn't need a bench with her name on it. She had 40 years of students who remembered her. She lived on Laurel Grove Lane in a house my grandfather built in 1952, in the heart of one of Charleston's historic preservation districts. She kept a garden with tomatoes and zinnias and a bird bath shaped like a copper globe that had turned green with age, and I always thought it was the most beautiful thing I'd ever seen. She drove a 2005 Buick LeSabre until the transmission gave out in 2021, and even then, she tried to convince the mechanic to fix it one more time. She ate canned soup and store-brand bread. She washed and reused Ziploc bags. She walked 3 miles to the public library every Saturday because she said the exercise was free and the books were priceless. She wore the same winter coat for 12 years, and she never, not once, complained about any of it. After the cemetery, most people did that awkward shuffle toward their cars, the one where everyone's sad but also kind of hungry and nobody wants to be the first to mention lunch. I went to the folding table and started picking up the maps Glenn hadn't managed to toss into the grave. That's when Paige showed up beside me. Paige Mercer, Glenn's daughter from his first marriage. 26, drove a white Kia Sportage, worked as the office manager at her dad's company. Paige and I were close as teenagers. Shared a bedroom every other weekend, watched the same terrible shows, braided each other's hair during sleepovers. Then we grew up, and she stayed in Glenn's orbit, and I didn't, and that distance settled in like dust on furniture nobody moves. But she helped me carry the boxes. Didn't say much, just grabbed the other side and walked with me to my Civic. We loaded 3 blue cardboard boxes into the back. The maps were heavier than I expected. Grandma Eleanor had over 400 pieces in her collection, and I had maybe 50 of them with me. The rest were still at her house on Laurel Grove Lane. At least, I assumed they were still there. Paige leaned against the hatch and told me she was sorry about her dad, that he shouldn't have done what he did, that he was stressed about the estate stuff. "It's already a thing," she said, like the man hadn't just made it a thing in front of 30 people and a pastor. She didn't push it. She hugged me, quick, one arm, and walked to her Sportage. I watched her pull away behind Glenn's Lexus, which was already halfway down the cemetery road, and I thought, that man has never not made a scene. Not once in the 19 years I've known him. Back at my apartment, I stacked the boxes against the wall next to my bookshelf, which was mostly paperback thrillers and a cookbook I'd used exactly twice. I poured a glass of Trader Joe's wine, the one in the green bottle, $5.99, don't judge me, and I started going through the boxes. Most of the maps were old, properly old, cloth-bound atlases with gold-stamped spines and that smell. If you know, you know. That dry, sweet, woody smell that old paper gets when it's been loved and stored and kept away from sunlight for decades. Some had protective sleeves. Some had little notes in Grandma Eleanor's handwriting in the margins. Her tiny, left-leaning print, always in pencil, never in ink, because she said ink was rude to a map. I didn't know what any of them were worth. I figured maybe a few $100 total, maybe enough to cover 1 month of the car payment if I was lucky. I started sorting them into piles. Looks old, looks really old, and looks like it might be worth something to someone who isn't me. That's when I picked up one that felt wrong. A large cloth-bound atlas with a dark blue cover and gold lettering on the spine. It was heavier than it looked. Not by a lot, just enough that my hand adjusted, like picking up a coffee mug you expected to be empty and finding it half full. Something about the back cover felt thicker than the front, denser, like there was more to it than cardboard and cloth. I almost opened it right there, but my phone buzzed. The credit union again. Third reminder this week, $683, further action may be taken. So instead of investigating the heavy atlas, I put it in the looks like it might be worth something pile and started Googling rare map dealers, Charleston. That's how I found Malcolm Ridley. Ridley Cartographic Antiquities, King Street, Charleston, open Tuesday through Saturday, 10 to 5. I called on Monday. A man answered with a voice that sounded like it had been steeped in old libraries for half a century. I told him I had some maps. He told me to bring whatever I had. Simple as that. No questions about provenance or condition or whether I knew a topographic survey from a placemat. Just bring them. The shop was the kind of place that makes you lower your voice when you walk in. Narrow storefront tucked between an art gallery and a store that sold handmade leather journals that cost more than my weekly groceries. Green awning out front, slightly faded from the Charleston sun. A little brass bell on the door that rang when I pushed it open, and the sound felt like it belonged to another century. Bookshelves and map cabinets lined every wall, floor to ceiling. The old wooden kind, dark walnut, that leaned slightly inward like they were trying to listen to each other. Flat file cabinets with brass handles sat underneath, the kind you pull out like drawers, each one holding maps pressed flat between sheets of acid-free tissue paper. The whole place smelled like leather and old paper and pipe tobacco, even though I was pretty sure nobody had smoked a pipe in there since the Clinton administration. This has nothing to do with the story, but there was a calico cat sleeping on a stack of oversized atlases near the register. She was curled into a perfect circle, one paw draped over the edge of a 1903 atlas of the Carolinas like she was claiming it. I spent a solid minute scratching behind her ears before I remembered why I was there. Her name was Meridian, I asked. Of course I asked. I work next to a veterinary supply company. I'm professionally obligated to ask every cat's name within a 15-foot radius. Okay. Focus. Malcolm Ridley was 69 years old, white-haired, reading glasses on a chain around his neck, wore a cardigan with elbow patches like he was the final boss of a geography department, which, as it turned out, he basically was. 25 years as a professor of historical geography at the College of Charleston before going private. 18 years as a rare map and atlas dealer. Member of the Antiquarian Booksellers Association of America, which I didn't even know was a real thing until he pointed to the framed certificate on the wall between a reproduction of a 1612 Virginia map and a watercolor of the Battery. He was gentle with the maps in a way that made me trust him immediately. The way a good vet handles a nervous animal, firm but careful, always supporting the edges, never letting a corner fold or a crease deepen. When he picked up an atlas, he cradled the spine with one hand and let the cover rest against his forearm like he was holding something alive. I set my 2 boxes on his counter and told him the short version. Grandmother died. History teacher, 40 years. Collector her whole life. I didn't know what I had. I was hoping, honestly hoping, that maybe a few pieces were worth enough to cover my past due car payment, $683. That was the number running through my head like a ticker tape. 683. That's what I needed. He nodded, started going through them. The first several he handled with polite appreciation, set them aside with little yellow sticky notes. Nice condition, good provenance, this is a lovely piece. He held up a hand-colored county map of Berkeley County from 1861. Maybe $300 for this one. Perhaps $350 to the right buyer. Normal stuff. The kind of money I was hoping for. $300 here, $200 there, maybe I'd scrape together enough for the car payment and have a little left over for groceries. I was already doing math in my head. If this one's $300 and that one's $200 and maybe that atlas in the corner is worth something, then $683 isn't impossible. It's tight, but it's not impossible. Malcolm kept working, methodical, patient. He'd pick up a piece, hold it at arm's length, tilt it toward the window light that came through the front of the shop in long golden slants. He'd check the corners, the fold lines, the printing marks. Then he'd set it down, make a note on his pad, always in pencil, and move to the next. Grandma Eleanor would have approved pencil, never ink. Then he reached into the second box and pulled out something in a protective linen sleeve. He slid it out carefully, both hands, and unrolled it across the glass countertop. It was large, maybe 20 by 26 inches, printed on heavy paper that had aged to the color of weak tea. He got quiet. Not the polite quiet from before, when he was being professional and measured. A different quiet. The kind of quiet that fills a room like water. Meridian the cat lifted her head from the atlas pile and stared at him. Even she felt it. He bent closer, adjusted his glasses, ran one finger along the bottom edge of the map without actually touching the paper, hovering just above it like he was reading Braille through the air. His hand was trembling. Not a little tremble, not a caffeine thing. A full, visible, can't hold the paper shaking. He set it down on the counter with both hands, the way you set down something that might shatter if you breathe wrong, took off his reading glasses, put them back on, picked up the phone on the counter, then put it back down. "Don't leave," he said. His voice had dropped to something barely above a whisper. "Do not leave this shop." I was standing in that man's store on a Tuesday afternoon with 2 cardboard boxes and a past-due car payment, and he was looking at me like I'd just walked in carrying the Dead Sea Scrolls in a grocery bag. "What is it?" I asked. He turned the map so I could see the bottom right corner. There was handwriting there. Old handwriting, faded brown ink, in a script so precise it looked like it had been drawn with a needle. "This," Malcolm said, and his voice cracked on the word, "is a hand-drawn manuscript map of Charleston Harbor, 1780. He paused, swallowed. "During the British siege, and unless I am very much mistaken, which I am not, it is signed." He wanted to know where my grandmother was from. "Charleston," I told him. "Born and raised, taught history and geography at Wando High School for 40 years. Spent her whole life collecting maps the way other people collect stamps or coins or regrets." Malcolm leaned back from the counter. He took off his glasses, cleaned them on his cardigan, put them back on, and then took them off again. I was starting to think the glasses were a nervous habit, like a rosary for academics. "Charleston Harbor, 1780, he said again, more to himself than to me. "During the British siege, your grandmother would have known exactly what this was." He pointed to the signature in the bottom corner without touching it. "This is a surveyor's map. Hand-drawn. Field measurements. The kind of document that was never meant to survive 245 years, and yet here it is, in a cardboard box, in my shop, on a Tuesday. He told me this map, in this condition, with this signature and this provenance, a 40-year Charleston history teacher's personal collection, was worth somewhere between $65,000 and $70,000. I laughed. I actually laughed out loud in that quiet shop, and it came out louder than I intended, the kind of laugh that sounds like it escaped from somewhere it was being held against its will. Meridian the cat raised her entire head this time and gave me a look of pure feline disappointment, like I'd interrupted her most important nap of the decade. $65,000 to $70,000 for one map. One. I came in here hoping to scrape together $683 for a car payment. I was doing math in my head so fast I probably looked like I was having some kind of episode. Malcolm actually asked if I needed to sit down. There was a stool near the register. I didn't sit down yet, but I filed the location away for later. Something told me I was going to need it. Because Malcolm wasn't done. He went back to the boxes. Carefully, methodically, the way he did everything, but faster now. There was an energy to his movements that hadn't been there before. He was a man who had just found one extraordinary thing and was now wondering what else was hiding in the cardboard. A lot, it turned out. He pulled out a Carey's American Atlas from 1795, one of the earliest American published atlases. The binding was worn but intact, the maps inside still vivid with hand coloring, and Malcolm handled it like it was a newborn. He made a sound when he opened it, a small, involuntary sound, somewhere between a gasp and a hum, the kind of noise a mechanic makes when he finds something unexpected under a hood. Except this wasn't a broken gasket. This was treasure. Then came a hand-colored map of Savannah from 1796, a colonial-era survey of the Carolina coastline, a set of Civil War battlefield maps with handwritten annotations from an officer whose name Malcolm recognized, an 1812 maritime chart of Charleston Harbor that he said was one of maybe 4 surviving copies. He was pulling pieces out of the boxes and lining them up on the counter like evidence in a trial, and with each one, his breathing got a little more deliberate, his hands a little more careful, his sticky notes a little more emphatic. The exclamation points were multiplying. Meridian had given up on sleep entirely and was sitting upright on her atlas pile, watching Malcolm with the intense focus of a cat who suspects the human is losing his mind. He did the calculations on a notepad, pencil, not pen. Grandma Eleanor would have approved. Conservatively, he said, and he stressed the word conservatively the way a doctor stresses the word preliminary before telling you something that's going to change your life. You are looking at a collection worth north of $275,000. I sat down on the stool by the register. I didn't decide to sit down. My body just did it, the way your legs buckle when the ground shifts under you. The stool creaked. Meridian looked at me. Malcolm looked at me. I looked at the ceiling because I couldn't look at anything else without my brain short-circuiting. $275,000 from a woman who lived on canned soup and store-brand bread and drove a 2005 Buick LeSabre until the transmission surrendered. A woman who washed Ziploc bags and walked 3 miles to the library every Saturday. A woman whose stepson-in-law called her maps useless and threw them on her casket. Glenn offered me $1,500 for those maps, by the way. Did I mention that? He called 3 days before the funeral. I didn't bring it up yet because there was already enough happening, but he called and said he'd take those dusty maps off my hands for $1,500 cash. Said it like he was doing me a favor, like he was the generous one. $1,500 for a collection worth $250,000. The man really thought I was that stupid, or that desperate, or both. And here's the thing that burns, the thing that kept me up that night, staring at the ceiling of my studio apartment. I almost said yes, because rent was due. Because I had $683 in car payment debt breathing down my neck. Because I was eating Trader Joe's wine for dinner and standing up at my kitchen table because I only owned 1 chair. I was this close to handing over a fortune because I was too broke to know what I had. That alone would have been enough of a story. Broke girl inherits valuable maps. Terrible stepfather tries to lowball her. Girl finds out and keeps them. The end. Credits roll. Everyone goes home satisfied. But Malcolm wasn't done. He was examining a folded map from 1843, something about coastal surveys, and he paused, tilted it toward the window light, slid a loose page out from between the folds. Not a map, not a note, a photocopy of a legal document. He read it, adjusted his glasses, read it again. Then he looked at me, and the expression on his face was entirely different from the excitement of the past hour. This wasn't wonder. This wasn't the thrill of discovery. This was concern. "Miss Ashby," he said, "do you know anything about a property transfer for 27 Laurel Grove Lane?" "My grandmother's house." "The house my grandfather built in 1952. The house where I spent every summer and every Christmas until I was 18. The house with the tomato garden and the zinnias and the copper globe bird bath that had turned green with age. "No," I said. "I don't." He handed me the photocopy. It was a deed transfer. Dated October 8, 2023. Eleanor Ashby to Mercer Commercial Properties, LLC. My stepfather's company. Malcolm pointed out that the transfer was to a company, not a person, for a residential property between family members, in a historic preservation district, with a fully paid-off mortgage. That was unusual. He said the word unusual the way a surgeon says concerning. Calm on the surface, red flags underneath. The mortgage was paid off. My grandfather finished payments in 1991. Grandma Eleanor hadn't owed a single dime on that house in over 30 years. "Check every single piece in this collection very carefully," Malcolm said, "before you sell anything." I drove back to Charleston doing 82 on I-26 and I don't even feel bad about it. I had 2 boxes of maps in the back of my Honda Civic that were apparently worth a down payment on a house, and somewhere inside them was a paper trail that was going to ruin my evening, possibly my whole week, possibly the rest of my year. The rearview mirror rattled the way it always does above 75. The scratch on the rear bumper caught the afternoon sun every time I changed lanes. $683. That's what I owed on this car. I was driving a vehicle I could barely afford, carrying cargo worth more than everything I owned combined, including the vehicle, and I had just learned that my dead grandmother's house had been signed over to my stepfather's commercial real estate company while she was still alive. The air conditioning wheezed. I turned it up anyway. Malcolm's voice was still in my head. "Check every single piece very carefully." The way he said it, quiet and steady, like a doctor telling you to get a second opinion. He wasn't saying it because he thought I'd find more valuable maps. He was saying it because he thought I'd find more paper. Back at my apartment, the boxes went onto the kitchen table. Same table where I eat cereal standing up. Same table with one chair. Except now the cereal was pushed to the counter and the table was covered in 245 years of cartographic history and possibly the evidence of a crime I didn't fully understand yet. I needed to think. I needed to eat something that wasn't cereal or $5.99 wine. I needed to sit in my one chair and stare at the wall for about 45 minutes while my brain assembled all the pieces into something that made sense. Instead, my phone buzzed. Paige Mercer. 3 words. "We need to talk." I started to type a response, but another message came through before I could finish, not on the phone. I met her at a coffee shop on East Bay Street, one of those places with exposed brick and mismatched furniture and a chalkboard menu that changes daily because apparently consistency is not aesthetic. Paige was already there when I arrived, sitting in the back corner with a latte she wasn't drinking. She was still in her work clothes, the khaki pants and collared shirt that Glenn required of all Mercer Commercial Properties employees, even his own daughter, because dress codes were apparently one of the things Glenn Mercer believed made him a serious businessman. She looked tired. Not the kind of tired you get from a long day, the kind of tired you get from listening to something you wish you hadn't heard. She told me Glenn had been on the phone non-stop for 2 days, calls to Harrison Caldwell, his lawyer. Calls she could hear through the office wall because Glenn had never learned to modulate his voice. The man spoke at a constant volume that suggested he believed everyone in every room needed to hear him at all times. She couldn't make out every word, but she caught pieces. The estate. Those damn maps. She doesn't know anything. And the one that stuck with her, the one that made her drive to a coffee shop on East Bay Street to meet her stepsister instead of going home after work. We need to move on this before she starts asking questions. I asked Paige what she thought it meant. She stared at her latte, turned it in her hands. The foam had settled into a flat white circle, and she was looking at it like it contained answers. "I think my dad is scared," she said. "And my dad doesn't get scared. He gets angry, he gets loud, he gets strategic. But scared?" She shook her head. "I've never seen it." I told her about the maps. Not the value, not yet, just that Malcolm had found something tucked inside one of them. A legal document, a property transfer. Her face didn't change, but her hands did. They tightened around the cup. "Laurel Grove Lane?" she asked. I nodded. She closed her eyes for a second. When she opened them, they were wet, but nothing fell. "I didn't know," she said. "I swear I didn't know." I believed her. I don't know why exactly. Maybe because of the way she carried those boxes at the cemetery without being asked. Maybe because she was sitting in a coffee shop telling me things that could get her fired from her own father's company. Maybe because some people just carry honesty the way others carry ambition, quietly and without trying to sell it. She told me to be careful. She said Glenn was not the kind of man who lost gracefully. She said Harrison Caldwell was not the kind of lawyer you wanted on the other side of a courtroom. She said, please. She said, for me. Then she picked up her latte, took one sip, made a face like it had gone cold 20 minutes ago, and left. The bell on the coffee shop door jingled behind her, and I sat there with my lukewarm drip coffee and a feeling in my stomach that was part fear and part something else, something sharper, something that felt like the beginning of knowing. I drove back to my apartment. The boxes were on the table where I left them. The maps were waiting. Grandma Eleanor's pencil notes in the margins, her tiny left-leaning handwriting, her whole life organized into acid-free sleeves and protective linen cases. Glenn was scared. A man who sat on the town planning commission, who had his name on a bench at Waterfront Park, who drove a Lexus with the engine running at funerals, who looked at a collection worth $250,000 and offered $1,500 like it was charity. That man was scared. Of what? Of maps? No, not of maps, of what was inside them. I stood in my kitchen, 9:47 on a Tuesday night, the radiator clicking in the corner even though it was March and I didn't need heat. And I looked at those boxes the way you look at a door. You know you have to open but aren't sure what's on the other side. Malcolm said, check everything. Paige said, be careful. Glenn said, we need to move on this before she starts asking questions. I was already asking questions. I poured the last of the Trader Joe's wine. I put on the overhead light because the lamp wasn't bright enough for what I was about to do. And at 2 a.m, I sat down on the floor of my studio apartment, surrounded by maps spread out across the hardwood like a miniature city, and I started looking for what my grandmother had hidden. The floor of my apartment was cold. March in Charleston means warm days and cool nights, and by 2 a.m, the hardwood had given up whatever heat the afternoon sun had pushed through the windows. I didn't care. I was sitting cross-legged in the middle of a city made of maps, and I was hunting. Each piece got the same treatment. Opened slowly, carefully, the way Malcolm had shown me. Check the folds, check between the pages, check behind the protective sleeves. Check inside the atlas covers, front and back, running my fingers along the edges where the end papers met the boards. Some had nothing extra in them. Just the map, the paper, the geography, and Grandma Eleanor's pencil notes in the margins. Her tiny left-leaning print that slanted backward toward her elbow, the way all left-handed writing does, always in pencil, never in ink, because ink was rude to a map. I kept going. The fourth atlas I opened had something tucked behind the front end paper, a folded slip of paper pressed flat and thin from years of being sandwiched between cardboard and cloth. I pulled it out carefully and unfolded it under the overhead light. A bank withdrawal receipt. Coastal Federal Credit Union, Mount Pleasant Branch. Eleanor Ashby, savings account, $3,800. Withdrawn June 21, 2021. My grandmother did not withdraw $3,800. My grandmother did not withdraw anything larger than her monthly Social Security deposit and the occasional $40 for groceries when the store brand was on sale. My grandmother once told me that taking money out of savings was like pulling threads from a sweater. You do it enough times and there's nothing left to keep you warm. I kept looking. More receipts. Hidden between map folds, slid behind protective sleeves, pressed flat between atlas pages like dried flowers someone forgot to throw away. Except nobody forgot. These were placed. Deliberately. Carefully. In the handwriting of a woman who spent 40 years teaching teenagers the importance of primary sources. $9,200. November 2021. $14,100. March 2022. $2,900. August 2022. $11,600. January 2023. The amounts kept coming, some small, some large, scattered across 3.5 years like breadcrumbs through a dark forest. I got a pen and a legal pad, yellow, the same kind Grandma Eleanor always used, the same kind I saw stacked on her desk every time I visited, and I started adding them up. My hand was shaking by the third column, not from the cold. When I finished, I put the pen down and stared at the number. $133,000. Over 3.5 years. Somebody had drained $133,000 from my grandmother's savings and CD accounts. My grandmother, the woman who reused Ziploc bags, who wore the same winter coat for 12 years, who walked 3 miles to the library because she said gas money was for emergencies, who ate canned soup 5 nights a week and called it a balanced diet because the label said it contained vegetables. That woman had nearly $150,000 in savings, 40 years of a teacher's salary, my grandfather's pension, their certificates of deposit, everything they had built together over a lifetime of careful, quiet, stubborn saving. And somebody pulled it out in chunks, month after month, year after year, like a parasite feeding so slowly the host doesn't notice until it's too late. I felt something building in my chest. Not sadness, not yet. Something heavier than sadness. Something with edges. Then I found the document that made me forget how to breathe. It was tucked inside an 1858 atlas of the southern states, folded in thirds, creased sharp, the paper newer than anything else I'd found, a power of attorney form, notarized. It authorized Glenn Mercer to act as financial agent for Eleanor Ashby, with full access to her bank accounts, real property, and legal affairs. The notary stamp read Dale Frazier, Goose Creek, South Carolina. The date read June 12, 2021. The signature at the bottom said Eleanor Ashby. Except here's the thing about my grandmother. She was left-handed. Had been her entire life. I have a photograph on my refrigerator, held up by a magnet shaped like the state of South Carolina, of her writing out Christmas cards at the kitchen table on Laurel Grove Lane. Pen in her left hand, that little hooked wrist position that lefties do, the one that smudges everything they write and makes ballpoint pens their natural enemy. Her handwriting always leaned left. The letters slanted backward toward her elbow, every single character tilting the same direction like trees bent by a constant wind. Everything she ever wrote in her life slanted left. The signature on this power of attorney slanted right. I sat there for a moment, holding the paper under the overhead light, and I could feel something clicking into place in my head, the way a key turns in a lock you didn't know was there. I picked up my phone and pulled up the calendar. June 12th, 2021. I remembered that date. I remembered it because I drove to MUSC Health to visit Grandma Eleanor after her knee replacement surgery. She had fallen in her garden on May 28th, a bad fall, the kind where the ambulance comes and the neighbors stand on their porches, and she had shattered her left kneecap. She was admitted to MUSC Health on May 28th and not discharged until June 19th. 3 weeks. I had the photos on my phone. I scrolled back through my camera roll, fingers moving fast, past pictures of my apartment and screenshots of recipes I'd never make, and a photo of someone's dog at the vet supply office. And there it was. June 12th, 2021. Grandma Eleanor in a hospital bed at MUSC Health. A get well card from the Wando High School staff propped on the bedside table. A plastic pitcher of water with a bendy straw. Her left hand resting on the blanket, bruised from the IV line. Her smile tired but real. On June 12, 2021, my 80-year-old grandmother was lying in a hospital bed recovering from knee replacement surgery. She was not sitting at a desk signing a power of attorney, giving Glenn Mercer access to everything she owned. This wasn't pressure. This wasn't confusion. This wasn't a weak moment at the kitchen table where someone talked her into something she didn't understand. This was a forged document. Glenn Mercer forged my grandmother's signature on a power of attorney, used it to drain $133,000 from her accounts over 3.5 years. Transferred her house, the house my grandfather built in 1952, the house in the Historic Preservation District, the house with the copper globe bird bath and the tomato garden, and 40 years of Christmas mornings to his commercial property company. And then, when she died, he stood at her funeral and threw her maps on her casket and called them trash. He called them trash because he wanted them destroyed, because she had hidden the evidence inside them, and he didn't know. He didn't know because Glenn Mercer never touched a map in his life, never opened an atlas, never cared about anything that didn't have a dollar sign already printed on it. I sat on the floor of my studio apartment at 3:27 in the morning, surrounded by maps and bank receipts and a forged legal document, and I did something I almost never do. I cried. Not the pretty kind. Not the single tear rolling down the cheek kind you see in movies. The kind where your face forgets what shape it's supposed to be and your body makes sounds like a washing machine with a brick in it. Because my grandmother, my tiny, left-handed, Ziploc bag washing grandmother, had been robbed blind, and she spent her last years living like she was poor because the money was gone. Her money. Their money. And Glenn Mercer drove a Lexus to her funeral. There is a level of rage that goes past crying, past throwing things, past screaming into a pillow at 3:30 in the morning while your neighbor's dog barks in sympathy through the wall. There is a level where everything goes very, very quiet, and your brain stops spinning and starts building, and the only thing in the world that matters is what you are going to do next. That's where I was when the sun came up. The first thing I did was the responsible thing, the adult thing. The thing you're supposed to do when you find evidence of fraud committed against a dead woman by a man who serves on the town planning commission. I went to the Berkeley County Clerk of Court. I drove to the courthouse on Main Street, parked in the garage that smelled like motor oil and broken promises, walked into the clerk's office with my eyes still swollen from crying and a gas station coffee in my hand that tasted like it had been brewed during the previous administration. The woman behind the counter had a nameplate that said Marquita, and she had the energy of someone who had answered the same question 11,000 times and had made peace with the fact that she would answer it 11,000 more. I requested the property records for 27 Laurel Grove Lane. She pulled it up in about 40 seconds. There it was, the deed transfer, October 8th, 2023. Eleanor Ashby to Mercer Commercial Properties, LLC. Notarized by Dale Frazier, Goose Creek, South Carolina. Filed with the county. Stamped, recorded, official, and it looked clean. I mean, it looked real. The notarization was proper. The filing was proper. There was nothing on that screen that screamed forgery. No red flags. No blinking warning lights. No pop-up window that said, "This document was created by a liar." Which I realize is a stupid thing to expect from a county database, but honestly, that's what I was hoping for. I thought I'd walk in, pull the records, and find some obvious crack. A missing date, a wrong signature, something that would make Marquita gasp and pick up the phone. Instead, it looked like a perfectly normal property transfer. Like my grandmother sat down one afternoon and decided to sign her house over to her stepson-in-law's commercial real estate company. Voluntarily, with a notary present, in a historic preservation district. For $0. The one time in my life I decide to be responsible and check public records, and the records are the lie. But I didn't leave, because I was already in the system, and curiosity is a disease I've never been able to cure. I pulled up the full record for Mercer Commercial Properties, LLC, just to see, just to look, just to scratch the itch that had been building since Malcolm slid that photocopy out of an 1843 coastal survey. And I found 3 more. 3 other property transfers to Mercer Commercial Properties in the past 18 months. 3 other homes, all previously owned by elderly individuals, all transferred through the same process, all notarized by the same man, Dale Frazier. Goose Creek, South Carolina. An 84-year-old widow on Pinckney Road, transfer dated March 2023. A 79-year-old retired mechanic on Cainhoy Road, transfer dated July 2023. A 77-year-old former school bus driver on Clements Ferry Road. Transfer dated December 2023. 4 transfers. 4 elderly property owners. 4 homes moved to Glenn Mercer's company. 1 notary. 2 is a coincidence. 3 is a pattern. 4 is a business model. My grandmother wasn't the only one. I sat there in front of the county computer terminal with Marquita filing something behind me and the fluorescent lights buzzing overhead, and I felt something shift inside my chest. This wasn't just about Grandma Eleanor anymore. This wasn't just about 1 forged signature and 1 stolen house. This was something bigger and uglier and more deliberate than anything I'd imagined when I walked into a map shop hoping to make $683. But I wasn't done. Because while I was in the system, I pulled one more thing, the zoning and planning records for the Laurel Grove Lane Historic District. And there, buried in a filing from 7 months ago, was an application to rezone the block from historic residential to mixed-use commercial, filed by Mercer Commercial Properties, LLC, supported by a letter from a member of the Town Planning Commission, Glenn Mercer, supporting his own rezoning application. From his seat on the commission, The application included a development proposal: demolish the existing historic structures on Laurel Grove Lane and replace them with a 42-unit luxury condominium complex. Estimated value: $4.8 million. The rendering showed a sleek glass and steel building with a rooftop pool and underground parking, the kind of thing that looks beautiful in a brochure and like an alien spacecraft when you put it next to a 200-year-old neighborhood. My grandmother's house. The house my grandfather built with his own hands in 1952. The tomato garden, the zinnias, the copper globe bird bath that had turned green with age. Glenn didn't just steal it, he was planning to erase it. I walked back to my car and sat in the parking garage for a while. The fluorescent lights hummed. A pigeon was walking around on the concrete like it owned the place, pecking at something that might have been a French fry or might have been a piece of someone's soul. Hard to tell in parking garage lighting. I envied that pigeon. That pigeon didn't have to worry about forged power of attorney documents or stepfathers who steal houses from old women and then bulldoze them to build condos with rooftop pools. I called Jess from the parking garage. Because Jess is the person I call when my brain starts doing the thing where it tries to convince me I'm crazy. Jess Kovac, my best friend since Wando High School. Emergency room nurse at MUSC Health. Draws blood, sets broken bones, talks down panicking patients at 3 a.m, and somehow she's still the most patient person I know. Recently divorced, raising a 5-year-old daughter named B, and still managed to answer my calls on the second ring every single time. Top 1% of human beings. Jess listened to the whole thing. The maps, the value, the property transfer, the bank receipts, the forged signature, the hospital photos, the 3 other properties, the rezoning application, all of it. She was quiet for a long time. Then she said something that landed like a stone in still water. Either your grandmother did sign it, or the forgery was good enough to fool the county. And if the forgery was that good, whoever did it had help. That landed. Because the notary on the power of attorney and all 4 deed transfers was the same person, Dale Frazier, Goose Creek, South Carolina. I looked him up on my phone right there in the parking garage. Semi-retired, 63, did notary work out of his house. He had a Google listing with 4 reviews, all 5 stars, all clearly written by the same person using different names because they all used the phrase prompt and professional, and one of them misspelled professional the exact same way twice. My phone buzzed. Paige. Her voice was tight, the kind of tight that comes from holding something back. He knows you went to the courthouse. He's been on the phone with Harrison Caldwell all morning. I sat in that parking garage with the pigeon and the fluorescent lights and the feeling that I was standing at the edge of something much bigger and much uglier than a pile of old maps and a forged signature. But I didn't have enough yet. I had photocopies and suspicions and a dead grandmother's hidden paper trail. That's not a case. That's a headache. I needed more. Glenn Mercer didn't knock like a normal person. He knocked like a man who owned the door. 3 hard raps. Wednesday evening, 7:15. I was standing in my kitchen in map-printed pajama pants and a College of Charleston t-shirt with a bleach stain on the collar, stirring a pot of instant ramen that cost 89 cents. The kind where the flavor packet looks like it was designed by someone who has never actually tasted chicken. I opened the door, and there he was. Navy polo. Mercer Commercial Properties logo embroidered on the chest in gold thread, like a coat of arms for a kingdom built on forged signatures. Khaki pants creased so sharp they could cut paper. Behind him, a black Lexus GX idled at the curb with its hazard lights blinking as if the visit itself was an emergency. He didn't wait for an invitation. Glenn stepped inside, and his eyes swept the studio the way a building inspector surveys a condemned property. Single chair, paperback thrillers stacked on the radiator. A $5.99 bottle of Trader Joe's Sauvignon Blanc, half empty. The 3 blue boxes against the wall. He stared at the boxes exactly 2 seconds too long. I counted. Nice place, he said, the way people say nice place when they mean I wouldn't store lawn equipment here. He lowered himself into my only chair, the wooden one I found at a thrift store on King Street for $12, and set a thick, business-size envelope on the table between us. The paper was cream-colored. Expensive. The kind lawyers use when they want you to feel small before you even open it. I want to make things right, Nora. He folded his hands like a man about to say grace. Your grandmother and I didn't always see eye to eye, but she was family. I respect that. He pushed the envelope toward me. $1,500 bills fanned out like a poker hand when I lifted the flap. $1,500 for a collection Malcolm Ridley had appraised at north of $275,000, 0.55%. I did the math in my head because numbers are the one thing I'm good at. Administrative assistants live and die by spreadsheets. That's very generous, I said, because sarcasm is free and I couldn't afford much else. Glenn missed the tone entirely. Or chose to. Take it, buy yourself something nice, pay off that little car note. He smiled. It was the smile of a man who had Googled my credit union balance and knew the exact number, $683, past due. And the maps? Old paper, Nora. Sentimental value at best. I've already spoken to Harrison Caldwell about the estate. Harrison Caldwell, Glenn's attorney. The name landed in the room like a brick through a window. Harrison believes your grandmother wasn't entirely coherent toward the end. We may need to revisit the will. I set the envelope down. She taught AP history until she was 79, Glenn. She could name every battle of the Revolutionary War in chronological order while repotting a gardenia. He leaned forward. The chair creaked. You're just a secretary, Nora. $34,200 a year. Do you really want to go up against me in court? There it was. The number. My salary, spoken aloud in my own apartment, weaponized. He stood, straightened his polo, and walked to the door. The offer expires Friday. After that, Caldwell files a motion to contest the will on grounds of diminished capacity. Your grandmother's medical records from MUSC Health are quite detailed. The door clicked shut behind him. The Lexus pulled away. The hazard lights stopped blinking. I stood in the middle of my studio holding a pot of overcooked ramen and $1,500 in cash and a silence so thick I could hear the radiator ticking. I didn't cry. Not yet. I set the pot on the stove, put the cash back in the envelope, placed the envelope on the kitchen counter next to the credit union reminder I'd been using as a coaster for 3 days. Then I picked up my keys, walked downstairs, got into the Civic, and drove. I didn't decide where. My hands decided. They turned right on Meeting, left on Calhoun, merged onto I-26, exited on Rivers Avenue, and pulled into the Walmart parking lot near the garden center, where the overhead lights buzz a specific shade of orange that makes everything look like a faded photograph. This is my crisis spot. It's the place I sat the night my mother's oncologist called with the final scan results. The place I sat when the dealership told me the transmission would cost more than the car was worth. The place I sit when the world gets too loud and I need a parking lot big enough to feel anonymous. I turned off the engine. The dashboard clock read 8:02 p.m. $1,500. That would cover the car note, 2 months of rent, and maybe a decent bottle of wine, one that didn't come from Trader Joe's. Or I could fight, hire a lawyer I couldn't afford, go to court against a man who sat on the town planning commission and donated $6,000 a year to the volunteer fire department and played golf with half the judges in Berkeley County. I opened the envelope again. 15 crisp bills. Benjamin Franklin stared up at me with that look he always has, like he knows something you don't. $34,200 a year. Just a secretary. I sat in that parking lot for 47 minutes. I know because the dashboard clock is the only thing in the Civic that works perfectly. Then my phone buzzed. Jess Kovac. 1 text. 7 words. Stay there. Bringing coffee. Don't do anything. Jess Kovac drove a 2019 Subaru Outback with a dented rear bumper, a faded Nurses Save Lives sticker on the left side, and an air freshener shaped like a pine tree that hadn't smelled like pine since the Obama administration. She pulled into the Walmart parking lot at 8:51 p.m., parked 3 spots to my left, and walked to my passenger door carrying 2 things: a large black coffee from the Waffle House on Rivers Avenue and a single-serve pack of Oreos she'd stolen from the hospital break room. She didn't ask what happened. She got in, handed me the coffee, tore open the Oreos, and said, "Eat first, talk second." I ate 4 Oreos in silence. The coffee was burnt, the way Waffle House coffee always is, like someone brewed it during the Carter administration and just kept the pot warm. But it was hot, and my hands were cold, and sometimes that's all a cup of coffee needs to be. Glenn came to my apartment, I said. I figured. He offered me $1,500 for the maps. Jess turned slowly. She's an ER nurse at MUSC Health. She has watched people flatline at 3 in the morning and restart hearts with her bare hands on a backboard. Very little surprises her. But her left eyebrow went up a full quarter inch, which, in Jess Kovac terms, is the equivalent of screaming. $1,500, she repeated, for a collection worth $275,000. At least. That's not an offer. That's an insult with a dollar sign. I told her everything. The boxes, Malcolm's appraisal, the 1,780 Charleston Harbor map with a faded signature worth $65,000 to $70,000 on its own. The 1,795 Carey's American Atlas, the photocopied deed transferring Grandma's house to Mercer Commercial Properties, the bank receipts totaling $133,000. The forged power of attorney dated the 12th of June 2021, while Eleanor Ashby was lying in a hospital bed at MUSC Health, recovering from a knee replacement, unable to hold a pen, let alone sign a legal document. The 3 other elderly homeowners on Pinckney Road, Cainhoy Road, and Clements Ferry Road. The rezoning application, the 42-unit luxury condominium project worth $4.8 million. Jess sat very still for about 30 seconds. The Walmart parking lot hummed around us. A woman pushed a cart full of paper towels toward a minivan. A teenager on a skateboard kicked past our bumper. The orange lights buzzed overhead like enormous tired insects. "Nora," Jess said finally, "that's not a greedy stepfather. That's a criminal enterprise." "I know, and he threatened you tonight." He said Caldwell would contest the will, claim Grandma had diminished capacity. Jess laughed once, short and hard. Eleanor Ashby. Diminished capacity. The woman who corrected the museum docent at Fort Sumter in front of a school field trip because he got the date of the first shot wrong by 1 day. April 12th, not April 13th, I said, because I'd heard the story 14 times. Exactly. Jess took an Oreo, bit it in half, and chewed slowly. This was her thinking face. Okay, here's what I need to know. The maps you found, the receipts, the POA, the deed, where exactly were they hidden? Tucked between the pages, folded into the binding. Some were loose, some were taped to the inside of the cloth covers. And you've checked every single piece? I paused. I thought about the 3 blue boxes sitting in my studio. The 2 I'd brought to Malcolm's shop. The 1 I'd sorted at the kitchen table at 2 in the morning. I'd gone through maybe 60% of the collection, maybe 70. No, I said. Jess turned to face me fully. The Waffle House coffee steamed between us. The parking lot lights turned her face half orange and half shadow, like a Caravaggio painting in a Walmart frame. "Nora, your grandmother was an AP history teacher for 40 years. She organized her lesson plans by semester, unit, and subtopic. She labeled her garden seeds in alphabetical order. She filed her tax returns in color-coded folders dating back to 1974. I knew where this was going. A woman like that doesn't just scatter evidence randomly through a box of maps. She hides it, deliberately, in a place only someone who loved those maps as much as she did would think to look. I stared at the dashboard. The clock read 9:14 p.m. "Did you check inside the atlas itself?" Jess asked. "Not between the pages. Inside. The binding, the spine, the back cover. I hadn't. The 1,795 Carey's American Atlas, the heaviest piece in the collection. The one Malcolm said was worth between $65,000 and $80,000 on its own. The one that felt unusually dense when I first lifted it 3 days ago in my kitchen. I'd noticed the weight. I'd even commented on it, but I hadn't opened the back cover. I hadn't checked the spine. I hadn't looked for a hidden compartment because I wasn't thinking like Eleanor Ashby. I was thinking like a scared 29-year-old with a past-due car note and a stepfather who owned half of Berkeley County. Jess put her hand on my arm. "Go home. Get a butter knife. Open that atlas from the back. And Nora." She squeezed once. Firm, the way she probably squeezed patients' hands before delivering bad news in the ER. "Whatever you find, photograph everything before you touch it. Every page, every angle, time-stamped." I turned the key. The Civic coughed twice and started. "One more thing," Jess said, opening the passenger door. She reached into her scrub pocket and pulled out a folded envelope. Inside, $700 in 20s and 10s, emergency fund. "I've been saving it since March." Jess, I can't. You can and you will. Consider it an investment. She stepped out, leaned back through the window, and smiled. I expect a full return when you sell that atlas. With interest. She drove off first. I sat for another minute, watching the Subaru's taillights disappear onto Rivers Avenue. Then I drove home. Fast. I made it home in 11 minutes. That's 4 minutes faster than normal, which means I ran at least 2 yellow lights and one that was probably red, but I'm choosing not to think about that. The studio was exactly how I'd left it. Ramen pot on the stove, Glenn's envelope of $1,500 on the counter next to the credit union reminder, the 3 blue boxes against the wall. And there, on the kitchen table, the 1,795 Carey's American Atlas, dark blue cloth, gold-stamped spine, sitting under the overhead light like a patient on an operating table, waiting for surgery. I locked the door, deadbolt and chain. Then I pulled every curtain shut, which took about 4 seconds because my apartment only has 3 windows, and one of them hasn't opened since 2019. I set my phone on the table, opened the camera, and switched to time-stamped photo mode. Jess's voice echoed in my head. Photograph everything before you touch it. Every page, every angle. I took 6 photos of the atlas from the outside: front cover, back cover, spine, top edge, bottom edge, the frayed corner where the cloth had worn through to the cardboard beneath. Then I picked up the butter knife from the dish rack, a dull, scratched IKEA butter knife that had cost me approximately 79 cents, and sat down. The atlas weighed about 4 pounds, too heavy. I'd noticed that 3 days ago when I first lifted it out of the box, and Malcolm had noticed it too. He'd said the paper alone didn't account for the density. At the time, I'd assumed it was the binding old adhesive, thick cardboard, maybe water damage that had added weight over the decades. I was wrong. I turned the atlas face down and ran the butter knife along the inner seam of the back cover. The cloth resisted for a moment, then separated with a soft tearing sound, like peeling a bandage off skin. Underneath the cloth was a layer of cardboard. And underneath the cardboard was a second layer thinner, newer, glued in place with something that smelled faintly of rubber cement. My hands were shaking, not the dramatic kind of shaking you see in movies, the real kind. The kind where your fingers won't cooperate and you have to set the knife down twice and breathe through your nose like a woman in a birthing class. I peeled the second layer back. Inside was a pocket, hand-cut, precise, the edges trimmed with scissors, not a machine I could see the slight irregularity of each cut. This was Eleanor Ashby's work. 40 years of lesson plans, color-coded tax returns, and garden seeds filed in alphabetical order. She had built this compartment the way she built everything, carefully, deliberately, and with the full expectation that someone she trusted would eventually find it. 4 documents, folded once, pressed flat. I photographed each one before removing it, front and back, timestamp 9:47 p.m. Document 1, the original power of attorney, not the photocopy I'd found tucked between the maps. The original, on cream-colored legal paper, with Dale Frazier's notary seal embossed in the lower right corner, dated the 12th of June, 2021. The signature read Eleanor M. Ashby, but the handwriting slanted to the right. Grandma was left-handed. Every letter she ever wrote, every grocery list, every birthday card, every check slanted left. This signature was a forgery, and now I had the original. Document 2, a deed transfer agreement for 27 Laurel Grove Lane, signed by Glenn Mercer and witnessed by Dale Frazier, transferring the property to Mercer Commercial Properties LLC effective October 8, Lanshenling Archesen. In the margin, in Eleanor's unmistakable left slanting pencil, a single note. I never signed this. He did it while I was in the garden. E.A. January 2025. January 2025, 2 months before she died. She knew. Document 3, 4 handwritten letters, each 1 page, on Eleanor's personal stationery cream paper with a pressed magnolia watermark, addressed to no one. Dated the 15th of January 2025. The letters described in calm and precise language the following. Glenn's visits to Coastal Federal Credit Union beginning June 2021. The withdrawals she discovered on her October 2024 bank statement, $133,000, missing over 3.5 years. Her confrontation with Glenn on the 2nd of November 2024, during which he told her she was confused and imagining things. Her subsequent visit to the credit union, where a manager confirmed the POA on file and showed her the signature she had never written. And her decision to hide the evidence inside the atlas because, in her words, Glenn will search the house, he will search the car, he will search my purse and my desk and my filing cabinet, but he will never open a book. He has never opened a book in his life. I read that line 3 times. Document 4, a single receipt from Mercer Commercial Properties, LLC, dated the 15th of March 2023, showing a payment of $4,200 to Dale Frazier, Notary Services, Goose Creek, .sm. In the memo line, handwritten, document preparation and certification, $4,200. To prepare and certify forged documents, I laid all 4 documents on the kitchen table side by side, photographed them individually and as a group. 12 shots total. Then I sat on the floor not because I chose to, but because my legs made the decision for me and stared at my grandmother's handwriting under the overhead light. She had known. For at least 3 months before she died, Eleanor Ashby had known exactly what Glenn Mercer was doing. She couldn't stop him alone. She was 82, recovering from a knee replacement, living in a house that technically no longer belonged to her. So she did the only thing a retired history teacher with 40 years of meticulous record-keeping could do. She built an archive, and she hid it in the one place she knew I would eventually look. I picked up my phone and called Malcolm Ridley. It rang 4 times. "Malcolm, it's Nora. I need a lawyer, the best one you know." Silence. Then, "I know exactly who to call. Can you be at my shop at 9 tomorrow morning?" "I'll be there at 8. I arrived at Ridley Cartographic Antiquities at 7:48 a.m., 12 minutes early, which is late by my grandmother's standards. Eleanor Ashby believed that if you weren't 15 minutes early, you were already behind, and if you were on time, you were merely adequate. 29 years of that philosophy had rewired my internal clock permanently. Malcolm was already inside. I could see him through the front window, moving between the walnut cabinets with a feather duster in one hand and a mug of tea in the other. Meridian, the calico cat, sat on a stack of 19th century railroad surveys and watched him with the calm superiority that only cats and tenured professors can sustain for extended periods. He unlocked the door at 7:52. "You look like you haven't slept." "I haven't." "Good. Neither has she." Before I could ask who she was, a bicycle bell rang behind me. I turned and saw a woman coasting down King Street on a dark green Schwinn with a wicker basket strapped to the handlebars. She wore a charcoal blazer over a white blouse, black trousers, and cycling shoes that clicked against the pedals with mechanical precision. Her hair was silver gray, cut short, practical. She was somewhere between 55 and 65, the kind of age where the number stops mattering because the person has clearly decided that efficiency is more important than appearance. She locked the Schwinn to a parking meter, removed a leather messenger bag from the basket, and walked into the shop like she owned the lease. "Catherine Yates," she said, extending her hand. Her grip was firm, brief, and exactly the right pressure, 3 qualities I have never once encountered simultaneously in a handshake. "Malcolm called me at 10 last night. I've been reading since midnight." "Reading what?" "Everything he sent me. The appraisal notes, the deed copies, your photographs from last night." She set the messenger bag on Malcolm's display counter right next to Meridian, who sniffed the leather once and returned to her atlas pillow. "I'm a property law attorney. Solo practice 14 years. I handle estate disputes, title fraud, and historic preservation cases. I do not handle divorces, parking tickets, or anything involving cryptocurrency." I liked her immediately. Malcolm poured 3 cups of Earl Grey loose leaf, not bagged, because Malcolm Ridley would sooner close the shop than serve tea from a bag, and the 3 of us sat at the back table where, 4 days ago, he had first told me my grandmother's maps were worth $250,000. I laid the 4 documents on the table. The original forged POA, the deed transfer with Eleanor's pencil note in the margin, the 4 handwritten letters dated the 15th of January 2025, the $4,200 receipt from Mercer Commercial Properties to Dale Frazier. Catherine examined each one without speaking. She used a pair of cotton gloves she'd brought in the messenger bag, white archival grade, and handled the papers the way Malcolm handled maps. Edges only, flat surface, no pressure on the folds. When she reached Eleanor's letters, she slowed down. I watched her eyes move across my grandmother's handwriting, the left slanting cursive, the careful loops, the magnolia watermark stationery, and something shifted in her expression. Not pity, recognition. Your grandmother was building a case, Catherine said. She knew she didn't have the strength to fight him in court. She didn't have the money. She was 82, post-surgery, living in a house that had already been transferred out of her name without her consent. So she documented everything and created a delivery mechanism. The Atlas. The Atlas. Catherine removed her gloves and folded them precisely. Mrs. Ashby, I'm going to be direct with you. This is not a civil dispute. This is criminal fraud, elder financial abuse, forgery, conspiracy. And based on the 3 additional property transfers you found at the courthouse Pinckney Road, Cainhoy Road, Clements Ferry Road, this is a pattern of predatory behavior targeting elderly homeowners in the Charleston area. Can you take the case? I can, but you need to understand the math. She pulled a yellow legal pad from the bag. Glenn Mercer operates Mercer Commercial Properties 45-plus rental units in Berkeley County. He sits on the Town Planning Commission. He donates $6,000 annually to the volunteer fire department. His attorney is Harrison Caldwell, who has practiced in this county for 31 years and golfs with at least 2 sitting judges. I know all of that. Good. Then you also know that going to court against him will cost between $15,000 and $25,000 in filing fees, expert witnesses, forensic handwriting analysis, and depositions. My stomach dropped. $25,000. I made $34,200 a year before taxes. I had $683 in overdue car payments and $700 in emergency cash from Jess sitting in an envelope on my kitchen counter. Catherine watched my face. She let the numbers sit for exactly 4 seconds, long enough to land, short enough not to crush. Which is why I'm taking this on contingency. I blinked. Contingency? No upfront fees. I cover all costs. If we win, and I believe we will, I take 20% of the recovered assets. If we lose, you owe me nothing. She wrote the number on the legal pad and underlined it twice. 20% of the estate recovery, not the map collection. The maps are yours regardless. Why would you do that? Catherine looked at the letters on the table. Eleanor's handwriting. The magnolia watermark. The line about Glenn never opening a book. Because I've practiced property law in Charleston for 14 years, and I've watched men like Glenn Mercer take houses from women like your grandmother 6 times. I've won 4 of those cases. I intend to make it 5. She paused. Also, Malcolm told me about the 1,780 Charleston Harbor map. I wrote my law school thesis on colonial-era maritime property boundaries, so consider me professionally motivated. Malcolm smiled into his tea. Catherine opened a manila folder and placed a single sheet in front of me. A retainer agreement. Clean, 1 page, plain language. There is one thing I need before I file, she said. The $4,200 payment to Dale Frazier. I need proof it came from Mercer Commercial Properties, not Glenn personally. Bank records. A canceled check. A wire transfer. Something with the LLC's name on it. I don't have that. Then we need someone who does. She looked at me. I looked at Malcolm. Malcolm stroked Meridian behind the ears and said nothing, because Malcolm Ridley understood that some silences are more useful than answers. I picked up my phone and scrolled to a contact I hadn't called in 6 months. Paige Mercer answered on the second ring, which surprised me. The last time I'd called her 6 months ago to ask about Thanksgiving plans, it had gone to voicemail 3 times before she texted back a single word. Busy. Nora. Her voice was flat, controlled. The voice of someone who has been expecting a phone call and dreading it simultaneously. I was wondering when you'd call. I need to see you. Not on the phone. I know. Meet me at the cafe on East Bay, the one with the blue awning. 30 minutes. She hung up. No small talk, no how are you. Paige Mercer had always been efficient, a trait she inherited from her father, though she would rather swallow a wasp than admit it. I drove to East Bay Street, parked the Civic in a 2-hour meter, and found her sitting at a corner table with a black coffee she hadn't touched. She was wearing a gray blazer and white shirt, office clothes, and her phone was face down on the table, which is something people do when they don't want to be tempted to check it. Paige is 26, Glenn's daughter from his first marriage, before he married my mother. She manages the office for Mercer Commercial Properties, scheduling, tenant complaints, accounts payable, the entire administrative spine of the operation. She knows where every dollar goes because she's the one who logs it. We are not sisters. We are not friends, exactly. We are two women who were raised in adjacent orbits of the same difficult man, close enough to understand each other but never close enough to trust completely. At Eleanor's funeral, she'd helped me carry the blue boxes to my car and whispered, "I'm sorry." At the time, I'd assumed she meant sorry about Grandma. Now, I wasn't sure. "Catherine Yates needs proof," I said. No preamble. Paige didn't need one. A bank record, a canceled check, a wire transfer, anything showing that Mercer Commercial Properties LLC paid $4,200 to Dale Frazier for notary services. Paige didn't flinch. She wrapped both hands around her coffee mug and stared at the surface of the liquid like she was reading tea leaves in a cup that contained no tea. "I know about the payment," she said quietly. "I'm the one who processed it." The cafe noise espresso machine, a couple arguing gently about parking, a barista calling out an oat milk latte, suddenly sounded very far away. The 15th of March 2023, Paige continued. Glenn handed me a check request. Payee, Dale Frazier, Notary Services, Goose Creek. Amount, $4,200. Memo line, document preparation and certification. I entered it into QuickBooks, printed the check, and put it in the outgoing mail. Did you know what it was for? Not then. I process 30 to 40 checks a month for the company. Contractor payments, maintenance invoices, permit fees. A $4,200 notary fee was unusual but not impossible. We'd done large closings before that required multiple notarizations. She paused, but then I saw the same name again. And again. How many times? 4. Between June 2021 and December 2023. Always to Dale Frazier. Always between $3,000 and $4,200. Always with the same memo, document preparation and certification. Paige finally lifted her eyes from the coffee. Nobody pays a notary $16,000 over 3 years for routine stamp work, Nora. I'm not stupid. When did you figure it out? November. After Grandma Eleanor, she caught herself. Eleanor wasn't her grandmother. But Paige had spent enough holidays at 27 Laurel Grove Lane to earn the word. After Eleanor confronted my father, I was in the next room. I heard her say, "I never signed that paper, Glenn, and you know it." He told her she was confused. She told him she'd been to the credit union. He went quiet, the kind of quiet my father only gets when he's calculating, not when he's sorry. Paige reached into her blazer pocket and placed a black USB flash drive on the table between us. It was small, generic, the kind you buy in a 3-pack at Office Depot. QuickBooks export. Every transaction from Mercer Commercial Properties to Dale Frazier. Dates, amounts, check numbers, memo lines, also the general ledger entries for the 4 property transfers: Laurel Grove Lane, Pinckney Road, Cainhoy Road, Clements Ferry Road, and the zoning application Glenn filed 7 months ago with the Planning Commission. I stared at the flash drive. Paige, if he finds out, he already found out. The cafe noise came back. The espresso machine hissed. I copied the files yesterday morning before the office opened. I used the backup server in the storage closet. The one Glenn doesn't know still syncs to the main system because I set it up 3 years ago and he never asked how it worked. A small, joyless smile. At 11 a.m., he called me into his office. He asked why I'd accessed the accounting server outside business hours. The security software flagged my login. What did you tell him? I told him I was reconciling the quarterly tax report. He didn't believe me. He looked at me the way he looked at Eleanor that night, calculating, not sorry. At 2 p.m., he told me my position was being eliminated due to restructuring. She said the word restructuring the way you'd say cockroach with precision and complete disgust. I was escorted out by Harrison Caldwell's paralegal. They took my keycard and my company laptop. They did not take my personal phone, which is where I'd already emailed myself the backup files. Paige pushed the flash drive 1 inch closer to me. 26 years, she said. I've spent 26 years trying to earn that man's approval. I organized his files. I answered his phones. I smiled at his tenants. I processed his checks without asking questions because that's what good daughters do. Her voice cracked a single fracture, quickly sealed. Eleanor was the only person in that family who ever treated me like I mattered. She taught me how to make sweet tea. She remembered my birthday when my father forgot. She left me a handwritten note in her Christmas card every single year. She straightened her blazer, picked up her untouched coffee, stood, "Give that to your lawyer." And Nora, she paused at the table's edge. "Win." She walked out the blue awning door, and I sat alone with a flash drive worth more than every map in Malcolm Ridley's shop. Catherine Yates reviewed the flash drive in 47 minutes. I know because I sat in Malcolm's back room watching her scroll through the QuickBooks files on a 13-inch laptop she'd pulled from the wicker basket of her Schwinn, and I counted every minute on the railroad clock hanging above the map cabinets. She didn't speak while she worked. She highlighted lines. She cross-referenced dates. She opened a yellow legal pad and wrote figures in a column so neat it could have been typeset. Occasionally, she murmured a number, 3800, June 21st. Clements Ferry like a surgeon calling instruments during an operation. At 10:32 a.m., she closed the laptop and removed her reading glasses. "This is enough," she said. Paige gave us the entire financial skeleton. 4 payments to Dale Frazier between June 2021 and December 2023. Check numbers, dates, amounts, memo lines, all routed through Mercer Commercial Properties LLC, not Glenn's personal accounts. That distinction matters. It means the fraud was conducted through a corporate entity, which elevates this from individual forgery to organized financial abuse. She tore a sheet from the legal pad. On it, she had written a single name and address, Dale Frazier, 1140, Old Trolley Road, Goose Creek, SC 29445. "I'm going to visit Mr. Frazier this afternoon," Catherine said. Alone. A notary who accepted $16,000 over 3 years for document preparation knows he's exposed. People like Dale Frazier don't need to be threatened. They need to be shown the math. I wanted to go with her. She told me no. You're the plaintiff. If Frazier sees you, he shuts down. If he sees a solo attorney with a legal pad and a very specific set of check numbers, he calculates his options. And his options are exactly 2, cooperate or face felony charges as a co-conspirator. She left on the Schwinn at El 15. I stayed in Malcolm's shop, sitting on a stool next to Meridian, who had migrated from the railroad surveys to a stack of 1840s coastal charts and showed no sign of caring about anything except the patch of sunlight moving across the walnut cabinet. Catherine called at 3:47 p.m. He broke in 22 minutes. Dale Frazier, 63, semi-retired, had opened his front door expecting a delivery. Instead, he found Catherine Yates holding a manila folder containing printed copies of every check Mercer Commercial Properties had issued to his name, annotated with dates that matched the forged POA, the deed transfers, and the hospital records proving Eleanor Ashby could not have signed the documents. He invited her inside, offered sweet tea. She declined. Frazier confirmed the following under a sworn written statement, signed and witnessed by a neighbor Catherine had recruited from the adjacent duplex. 1. Glenn Mercer contacted him in May 2021 and asked him to notarize a power of attorney for Eleanor Ashby. Eleanor was not present. Glenn provided the signature. Frazier notarized it without verifying the signer's identity, in violation of South Carolina Code Section 26190. 2. Between 2021 and 2023, Frazier notarized 4 additional documents for Mercer Commercial Properties, 3 property transfer deeds for homes on Pinckney Road, Cainhoy Road, and Clements Ferry Road, and 1 deed for 27 Laurel Grove Lane. In each case, the property owner was not present at the signing. 3. Frazier received total compensation of $16,200 for these services. He described the arrangement as document preparation, but acknowledged under Catherine's questioning that he understood the signatures were not authentic. 4. Frazier identified Harrison Caldwell as the attorney who drafted the transfer agreements and advised Glenn on the legal structure of each transaction. He cried twice, Catherine told me on the phone. Once when I showed him the hospital records, and once when I asked if he knew Eleanor Ashby had died, believing no one would ever find the evidence. I didn't feel sorry for him. I wanted to, because crying usually triggers something in me, some instinct left over from a childhood spent watching my mother comfort patients in the oncology ward. But Dale Frazier had stamped his seal on a forged document while an 80-year-old woman lay in a hospital bed 7 miles away, and he had done it 4 more times after that, and he had cashed $16,200 in checks, and he had slept fine every night until a woman on a bicycle showed up with the receipts. Catherine filed the petition the next morning. Berkeley County Circuit Court, case number 2025 CP 08-01847, plaintiff Nora Ashby. Defendants: Glenn Mercer, Mercer Commercial Properties, LLC, Dale Frazier, Harrison Caldwell. Claims: fraud, forgery, elder financial abuse, conspiracy, breach of fiduciary duty, void transfer of real property. And then Thelma Rawlings called. Thelma was a senior investigative reporter at the Charleston Post and Courier. She had covered property fraud in the Lowcountry for 9 years. Malcolm knew her because she'd once written a feature on rare map theft from the Charleston Museum. Catherine knew her because Thelma had covered 2 of her previous elder abuse cases. Thelma had received a tip she wouldn't say from whom, though I suspected Malcolm's tea and feather duster routine concealed a man who understood exactly when to make a phone call, and she wanted to meet. We met at Waterfront Park on a bench facing the harbor. Thelma was 51, tall, with reading glasses perpetually pushed up on her forehead and a notebook that looked like it had survived 3 hurricanes. She listened to the full story in 19 minutes without interrupting once. Then she asked one question. How many other victims? 3 that we know of: Pinckney Road, Cainhoy Road, Clements Ferry Road. Thelma wrote the addresses down, closed her notebook, looked at the harbor. I'm going to find them, she said. All 3. And if there are more, I'll find those too. Give me 72 hours. 72 hours later, her story ran on the front page. Above the fold, headline, Pattern of Predation, How a Charleston Developer Stripped Homes from the Elderly. By noon, 147 people had signed a petition demanding Glenn Mercer's removal from the Town Planning Commission. The historic Charleston Foundation issued a formal statement opposing the Laurel Grove Lane rezoning. A community meeting was scheduled for the following Thursday at St. Matthew's Lutheran Church. Glenn Mercer's phone, according to Page, had not stopped ringing. But he wasn't answering. The Berkeley County Courthouse smells like floor wax and old paper, and the particular kind of silence that settles over a building where people's lives get rearranged. I know this because I arrived at 7:36 a.m., 54 minutes before the hearing, and spent most of that time sitting on a wooden bench in the hallway, breathing through my nose and trying to keep my breakfast where it belonged. The 24th of April 2025, Courtroom 3B, Case Number 2025, CP 08-01847, Plaintiff Nora Ashby. Defendants: Glenn Mercer, Mercer Commercial Properties, LLC, Dale Frazier, Harrison Caldwell. Catherine had told me to wear something professional but not expensive. The judge needs to see a working person, not a performance, she'd said. So I wore my One Good Blazer navy from a consignment shop on Upper King Street, $18 a white blouse, and the black flats I'd bought for my mother's funeral 7 years ago. I'd ironed the blazer at 5 a.m. on a towel on the kitchen floor because I don't own an ironing board. Jess arrived at 7:50, carrying 2 coffees and wearing scrubs because she'd driven straight from the night shift at MUSC Health. She had dark circles under her eyes and a calm expression that I recognized from the Walmart parking lot, the look of a woman who has decided that the next few hours matter and sleep can wait. Malcolm came at 8:05 in a tweed jacket and a green bow tie I'd never seen before. He sat on my left side and said nothing, which was exactly right. Paige did not come. We'd agreed it was too risky. She'd been fired, and her presence in the courtroom could be interpreted as a disgruntled former employee with a vendetta. Catherine had taken her deposition separately, a 40-minute recorded statement covering the QuickBooks files, the check numbers, the security flag incident, and the termination. The flash drive was already entered as Exhibit D. At 8:25, Glenn Mercer walked in. He was wearing a charcoal suit, Italian cut, a burgundy tie with a silver pin. His shoes were polished to the kind of shine that requires a professional, not a man kneeling in his bathroom with a rag, but an actual shoe shine service, the kind that costs $15 and exists in airports and country clubs. He looked like a man who had dressed for a board meeting, not a fraud hearing. Harrison Caldwell walked beside him, tall, silver-haired, 63, wearing a dark blue suit and carrying a leather briefcase that probably cost more than my monthly rent. Caldwell had practiced in Berkeley County for 31 years. He knew the clerks by first name. He knew the judges by golf handicap. He walked into that courtroom the way Glenn had walked into my apartment, like he owned the room and everyone in it was paying rent. They sat on the right side. Glenn did not look at me, not once. He stared straight ahead with his hands folded on the table, the same posture he'd used in my apartment when he'd pushed the $1,500 envelope across the table. Composed. Calculating. Still. Judge Margaret Hale entered at 8:30 sharp, 61 years old. Appointed to the circuit bench in 2014. Known, according to Catherine, for two things: an intolerance for theatrics and a photographic memory for case law. She wore no jewelry except a watch, and she looked at both tables with the same expression, neutral, patient, and approximately as warm as a granite countertop. Catherine stood first. She was wearing the same charcoal blazer she'd worn the day she rode her Schwinn to Malcolm's shop. No jewelry, no briefcase, just the yellow legal pad and a single manila folder. Your Honor, the plaintiff respectfully submits 7 pieces of evidence in support of the petition to void the transfer of 27 Laurel Grove Lane and freeze all assets held by Mercer Commercial Properties, LLC. She laid them out one at a time, slowly, deliberately, the way Malcolm handled rare maps, edges only, flat surface, each piece given room to breathe. Exhibit A, the original power of attorney dated the 12th of June 2021, notarized by Dale Frazier, bearing a signature that slanted to the right. Beside it, Catherine placed 12 samples of Eleanor Ashby's authentic handwriting, grocery lists, tax returns, birthday cards, lesson plans, every single one slanting to the left. Eleanor Ashby was left-handed, Your Honor. She wrote with a left slant for 82 years. This signature was not written by her hand. Exhibit B, MUSC Health Hospital records confirming Eleanor Ashby was admitted the 28th of May 2021 for knee replacement surgery and discharged the 19th of June 2021. The POA was dated June 12. The alleged signer was in a hospital bed, sedated and recovering from surgery, on the date this document was notarized 7 miles away in Goose Creek. Exhibit C, Coastal Federal Credit Union records showing 17 withdrawals from Eleanor Ashby's accounts between June 2021 and January 2025, totaling $133,000. Each withdrawal authorized by the forged POA. Exhibit D, the flash drive provided by Paige Mercer, containing QuickBooks records from Mercer Commercial Properties, showing 4 payments to Dale Frazier, totaling $16,200 between 2021 and 2023, each with the memo line, document preparation, and certification. Exhibit E, Dale Frazier's sworn statement, signed and witnessed, confirming he notarized documents without the property owners present and was compensated through the LLC. Exhibit F, Eleanor Ashby's 4 handwritten letters dated the 15th of January 2025, describing the fraud, the confrontation with Glenn, the credit union visit, and her decision to hide the evidence inside the atlas. Catherine read one sentence aloud. He will never open a book. He has never opened a book in his life. A sound moved through the courtroom, not a gasp, quieter. The collective inhale of 38 people who understood, in the same instant, that an 82-year-old woman had outmaneuvered her predator from beyond the grave. Exhibit G, the zoning application filed by Mercer Commercial Properties to rezone Laurel Grove Lane from residential to mixed use, proposing demolition of 4 historic homes for a 42-unit luxury condominium development valued at $4.8 million. Catherine closed the manila folder, placed her pen on the legal pad, looked at the judge. Your Honor, the plaintiff requests an emergency asset freeze and an immediate voiding of all 4 property transfers executed by Dale Frazier on behalf of the defendants. She sat down. The courtroom was silent. Judge Hale wrote something on her notepad without looking up. Then she turned to Harrison Caldwell. Counsel, your response. Harrison Caldwell stood the way. Expensive lawyers stand slowly, with one button fastened, as if the act of rising deserved its own billing increment. He straightened his cuffs, adjusted the leather briefcase on the table. cleared his throat with a sound that suggested he had done this approximately 4,000 times in 31 years, and every single one of those times the courtroom had waited for him. "Your Honor," he began, "my client, Mr. Glenn Mercer, is a respected member of this community, a property developer, a planning commissioner, a donor to the Berkeley County Volunteer Fire Department for 11 consecutive years. The allegations before this court are based on documents of questionable provenance, provided by a disgruntled former employee with a personal vendetta and interpreted by a solo practitioner with no forensic handwriting credentials." Catherine didn't move. Her pen stayed on the legal pad. Her hands stayed flat on the table. Caldwell continued. "The power of attorney was executed lawfully and notarized by a licensed South Carolina notary. Mrs. Ashby's mental state in her final years was, regrettably, in decline. Medical records from MUSC Health confirm cognitive assessments consistent with age-related weather." Objection. Catherine's voice was level, not loud, the kind of quiet that makes people lean forward. "Your Honor, the MUSC Health records submitted by the plaintiff Exhibit B contain the complete cognitive evaluation performed during Mrs. Ashby's May 2021 admission. The Montreal Cognitive Assessment score was 28 out of 30. The attending physician noted, and I quote, "Patient is alert, oriented to time, place, and person, with no evidence of cognitive impairment." 28 out of 30 is a normal score. I scored a 27 last Tuesday, and I'm standing in a courtroom. A ripple of laughter. Judge Hale did not smile, but something shifted around her eyes, a micro-expression that Catherine would later describe to me as the closest Margaret Hale gets to applause. "Sustained," the judge said. "Counsel, confine your remarks to evidence in the record." Caldwell paused. It was a short pause, maybe 3 seconds, but in a courtroom, 3 seconds of silence from a 31-year veteran is the equivalent of a 14-car pileup on I-26. I watched his left hand drift to the briefcase clasp and then drift away, as if the briefcase contained something he had planned to use but was now reconsidering. He tried another angle. "Your Honor, the property transfers were legitimate business transactions. Mr. Mercer invested significant personal capital in maintaining and improving these properties. The rezoning application represents a lawful exercise of—" "Mr. Caldwell." Judge Hale looked up from her notepad. "I have reviewed Exhibit G. The zoning application proposes demolition of 4 residential homes, 3 of which were transferred to your client's LLC within a 21-month period, all notarized by the same individual who has now provided a sworn statement admitting he did not verify the signers' identities." She paused. "Do you wish to address the sworn statement?" Caldwell turned to Glenn. "This is the moment I will remember for the rest of my life. Not because of what Caldwell said, but because of what Glenn did. Nothing." Glenn Mercer sat in his charcoal Italian suit with his hands folded on the table and stared at a point approximately 6 inches above the judge's head. His expression hadn't changed since he'd walked in. No anger, no fear, no calculation. Just the blank, polished surface of a man who had spent his entire adult life controlling rooms and had just realized, perhaps for the first time, that this room did not belong to him. Caldwell turned back to the judge. He opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again. "Your Honor, may I request a brief recess to confer with my client?" "You may not. The evidence is before me. I see no reason for delay." Caldwell stood motionless for 4 seconds. Then he did something I did not expect. "Your Honor, upon further review of the materials presented, I am withdrawing as counsel for Mr. Mercer and Mercer Commercial Properties, LLC, effective immediately." The courtroom inhaled. Not a gasp. Courtrooms don't gasp the way they do in movies. It was more like the sound of 38 people simultaneously holding their breath, the way Malcolm Ridley had held his breath in the map shop the day I first walked in with a box of atlases. Glenn's head turned, slowly. He looked at Caldwell the way a man looks at a lifeboat pulling away from a sinking ship. Caldwell did not look back. Massic. He was already closing his briefcase, both clasps, precise, final, and stepping away from the defense table. "Counsel's withdrawal is noted," Judge Hale said. "Mr. Mercer, you have the right to retain new counsel. However, this court will proceed with its ruling on the emergency petition today. You may represent yourself or request a continuance, which I will consider on its merits." Glenn said nothing. He sat alone at the defense table, no lawyer, no briefcase, no burgundy tie-pin confidence, and for the first time since I'd known him, he looked exactly like what he was. A 60-year-old man in an expensive suit, with no one left on his side. Judge Hale reviewed her notes for approximately 90 seconds. The courtroom was so quiet I could hear Jess breathing beside me and the scratch of Malcolm's bow tie clip against the wooden bench. Then she spoke. Based on the evidence presented, including the original power of attorney bearing a signature inconsistent with the decedent's established handwriting, hospital records confirming the decedent's physical incapacity on the date of notarization, bank records documenting unauthorized withdrawals totaling $133,000, corporate payment records to the notary's sworn confession, the decedent's own contemporaneous written account of the fraud, and the rezoning application demonstrating financial motive, this court grants the plaintiff's emergency petition. She listed the orders, all 4 property transfers voided, effective immediately. All assets held by Mercer Commercial Properties LLC frozen pending full adjudication. The matter referred to the Berkeley County Solicitor's Office for Criminal Investigation, Dale Frazier's notary commission suspended, and a recommendation to the state attorney general for a formal inquiry into Harrison Caldwell's role in preparing the fraudulent transfer documents. Judge Hale closed her folder, looked at Glenn Mercer one final time. Mr. Mercer, in my experience, people who take from the elderly often assume no one is paying attention. She paused. I imagine your stepdaughter has corrected that assumption. She struck the gavel once. Court is adjourned. Glenn Mercer was arrested on a Tuesday. Not at the courthouse, not at his office. At a Cracker Barrel on Highway 17A in Somerville, sitting alone in a corner booth with a plate of country fried steak he hadn't touched, and a glass of sweet tea with the condensation running down the side like the glass itself was sweating. 2 Berkeley County Sheriff's deputies walked in at 12:14 p.m. They were calm, professional, and clearly experienced at the specific art of arresting a man in a restaurant without causing a scene. One stood by the door. The other approached the booth, leaned down, and said something I will never know because I wasn't there. Paige told me later. She heard it from a waitress named Donna who had served Glenn his tea and then watched him get handcuffed between the salt shaker and a basket of biscuits. The charges. 3 counts of elder financial abuse under South Carolina Code Section 433515. 2 counts of forgery, first degree. 1 count of conspiracy to commit fraud. 1 count of exploitation of a vulnerable adult. 1 count of filing fraudulent property documents with the Berkeley County Register of Deeds. 8 charges. 8 separate lines on a booking sheet at the Berkeley County Detention Center, where Glenn Mercer, Planning Commissioner, Fire Department donor, owner of 45-plus rental units, was photographed, fingerprinted, and assigned inmate number 202504000619. Bail was set at $175,000. He posted it within 4 hours. But the money came from a personal savings account, not the LLC, because the LLC's assets were frozen solid, locked behind Judge Hale's emergency order like a vault with no combination. The Post and Courier ran Thelma Rawlings's second story the following morning. This one wasn't above the fold. It was the entire front page. Developer arrested. Glenn Mercer charged with elder fraud, forgery in multi-property scheme. The story included the booking photo Glenn in a charcoal suit with no tie, because they'd taken the burgundy tie at intake. His expression was the same blank mask he'd worn in the courtroom, but the lighting was different. Detention center fluorescents don't flatter anyone. They turn skin gray and eyes flat, and they erase the particular kind of confidence that comes from Italian tailoring and polished shoes. Thelma had found the 3 other victims. Mildred Pace, 84, widow, Pinckney Road, retired school librarian. Her home had been transferred to Mercer Commercial Properties in March 2023. She discovered it when a property tax bill arrived addressed to an LLC she'd never heard of. She thought it was a clerical error. It wasn't. Lester Boone, 79, retired auto mechanic, Cainhoy Road, lived alone. His property was transferred in July 2023. He found out when a contractor showed up to measure his front yard for a parking lot. Lester called the county office. They told him he no longer owned his home. He hung up the phone and didn't call anyone else for 5 months because he was embarrassed. Opal Simmons, 77, former school bus driver, Clements Ferry Road. Her house, a 3-bedroom ranch she and her late husband had built in 1968, was transferred in December 2023. Opal didn't find out at all until Thelma Rawlings knocked on her door with a printout from the county records office. 3 people, 3 homes, 3 forged signatures, all notarized by Dale Frazier, all facilitated by Harrison Caldwell's legal filings, all enriching Mercer Commercial Properties, LLC. Thelma's article quoted Catherine Yates. This was not a one-time lapse in judgment. This was a systematic operation designed to exploit elderly homeowners who lacked the resources, the knowledge, or the family support to fight back. Eleanor Ashby was the exception, not because she had resources, but because she had a plan. The community response was immediate and enormous. The Berkeley County Planning Commission held an emergency session on Thursday evening. 112 residents packed the meeting room at the county administrative building. 47 more stood in the hallway. The commission voted 6-1 to remove Glenn Mercer from his seat. The sole dissenting vote came from a commissioner who argued they should wait for the criminal trial and who was loudly booed by a 70-year-old woman in the second row wearing a T-shirt that read, "Protect Our Elders." The historic Charleston Foundation filed a formal objection to the Laurel Grove Lane rezoning application, citing the pending criminal case and the fraudulent property transfers underlying the development proposal. The application was tabled indefinitely. Mercer Commercial Properties, LLC, began to collapse within a week. Tenants in Glenn's 45 rental units received notices that management had been transferred to a court-appointed receiver. Contractors filed liens for unpaid invoices totaling $38,400. The company's insurance carrier initiated a policy review. 2 banks froze lines of credit. Harrison Caldwell, who had withdrawn from the case in open court, was not arrested. But the state attorney general's office opened a formal investigation into his role in preparing the fraudulent transfer documents. His law firm issued a 1-sentence statement. Mr. Caldwell is cooperating fully with all inquiries. His name disappeared from the firm's website the following Monday. Dale Frazier's notary commission was permanently revoked by the South Carolina Secretary of State's office. He faced separate misdemeanor charges for failure to verify signer identity on 4 occasions. His neighbor, the same one Catherine had recruited as a witness for the sworn statement, told Thelma Rawlings that Frazier hadn't left his house in 6 days. I read all of this from my kitchen table on Meeting Street, sitting in the same chair where I'd sorted maps at 2 in the morning, where Glenn had pushed $1,500 across the surface, where I'd spread Eleanor's letters under the overhead light and cried on the floor at 3:27 a.m. Jess texted me a link to Thelma's article with one word: justice. Malcolm called to say that 3 rare map collectors from New York, Boston, and London had contacted him about the 1,780 Charleston Harbor map. He was fielding inquiries. He sounded happy in the quiet, precise way that Malcolm sounds happy, as if the emotion had been cataloged and filed in the correct cabinet. Paige didn't text, didn't call, but at 6 p.m. on Thursday, I found a small package outside my apartment door. Inside was a magnolia-scented candle and a handwritten note on plain white paper. She would be proud of you. P. I set it on the kitchen table next to Eleanor's letters and let it burn all evening. 6 weeks later, I stood in the front hallway of 27 Laurel Grove Lane and listened to the house breathe. That sounds strange. Houses don't breathe. But this one did a slow, wooden exhale of settling floorboards and warm air moving through rooms that had been closed for months. The smell was exactly what I remembered. Lemon furniture polish, old paper, and the faint ghost of Eleanor Ashby's gardenia perfume, which had soaked so deeply into the wallpaper over 40 years that no amount of airing out would ever fully erase it. The court order restoring the property to my name had been signed on the 8th of May 2025. Catherine hand-delivered the document on her Schwinn messenger bag in the wicker basket, cycling shoes clicking on the front porch. She stood in the doorway and said, "Welcome home, Nora," and then she left, because Catherine Yates does not do sentiment longer than 4 words. I walked through every room. The kitchen, where Eleanor had taught Paige to make sweet tea and taught me to read maps by tracing the coastline with my finger while the kettle boiled. The study, where 400 cloth-bound atlases had once filled floor-to-ceiling shelves, half of them now in my studio on Meeting Street, the other half at Malcolm's shop undergoing professional conservation. The garden, where the gardenias Eleanor had planted in 1987, were blooming again despite 2 months of neglect, because gardenias, like Ashby women, are apparently difficult to kill. The map collection was formally appraised at $193,400 by an independent ABAA-certified dealer from Savannah, lower than Malcolm's initial estimate of $275,000 because 12 of the less significant pieces had minor water damage. The 1,780 Charleston Harbor map alone was valued at $67,500. The 1,795 Carey's American Atlas, the one with the hidden compartment, the butter knife scar along the back cover, the secret pocket Eleanor had built with scissors and rubber cement, was valued at $74,200. I did not sell the Atlas. I will never sell the Atlas. Catherine's contingency fee came to $38,680, 20% of the recovered estate assets, not including the maps. I wrote the check without flinching. It was the most money I had ever spent on a single transaction, and it was worth every cent. The 3 other victim families received full restitution through the court-ordered asset liquidation of Mercer Commercial Properties, LLC. Mildred Pace got her house on Pinckney Road back and promptly planted a rose bush in the front yard. Lester Boone got his property on Cainhoy Road restored and finally replaced the mailbox that had been leaning at a 40-degree angle since 2019. Opal Simmons got her ranch on Clements Ferry Road back, and her granddaughter moved in to help with the yard, the same granddaughter who had been deployed overseas when the transfer happened and didn't learn about it until Thelma Rawlings called her commanding officer. Glenn Mercer pleaded guilty to 5 of the 8 charges in a deal that avoided a full trial. He was sentenced to 4 years in the South Carolina Department of Corrections with eligibility for parole after 30 months. His real estate license was permanently revoked. His planning commission seat was filled by a retired urban planner named Dolores Whitaker, who, at her first meeting, proposed a historic preservation overlay for the entire Laurel Grove neighborhood. The motion passed unanimously. Dale Frazier received 18 months of probation, 200 hours of community service, and a permanent ban from notarial practice. He moved to Myrtle Beach. No one I know has heard from him since. Harrison Caldwell surrendered his law license voluntarily before the state bar could revoke it. His firm dissolved quietly. The building on Broad Street where he'd practiced for 31 years is now a yoga studio. Paige Mercer started a bookkeeping service for small businesses in North Charleston. She operates out of a rented office above a bakery on Park Circle. Her first client was a 73-year-old woman who needed help organizing 40 years of tax records. Paige told me she cried in the car afterward, not from sadness, but from the realization that she was finally using her skills for someone who deserved them. Jess Kovac accepted a $700 repayment check, which I presented inside a Waffle House coffee cup at the Walmart parking lot on Rivers Avenue, because some locations deserve to be part of the story twice. She used the money to buy a new air freshener for the Subaru. It still doesn't smell like pine. Malcolm Ridley continues to operate Ridley Cartographic Antiquities on King Street. Meridian continues to sleep on priceless maps. Business has increased 14% since Thelma's articles ran, which Malcolm attributes to public awareness of cartographic heritage, and which I attribute to the fact that everyone in Charleston now knows his shop is where the whole thing started. Thelma Rawlings was nominated for a South Carolina Press Association award for her investigative series. She told me she'd rather have a good source than a trophy. I told her she could have both. And the house. 27 Laurel Grove Lane is no longer just a house. On the 14th of June, 2025, with help from the historic Charleston Foundation, Malcolm Ridley, and a small grant from the South Carolina Humanities Council, I opened the front room as a free community space. The Eleanor Ashby Map Room. It holds 62 of Eleanor's maps, the ones Malcolm deemed stable enough for display mounted in acid-free frames behind UV protective glass. A hand-painted sign above the door reads, "Every map is a letter from someone who was there to someone who wasn't yet." Eleanor wrote that in a lesson plan dated September 1989. I found it tucked inside a 1920 Rand McNally Road Atlas between Georgia and South Carolina. On the first Saturday, 11 people came. On the second, 23. On the third, a retired history teacher from Somerville drove 40 minutes to see the 1,780 Charleston Harbor map, stood in front of it for 9 full minutes without speaking, and left a handwritten note in the guest book. Eleanor would have loved this room. She would have. I adopted a cat from the Charleston Animal Society. Orange Tabby, 3 years old, missing half his left ear from a disagreement with a raccoon. I named him Compass. He sleeps on the Atlas shelf, right next to Eleanor's letters. Eleanor Ashby didn't have a lawyer. She didn't have money. She didn't have the strength to fight a man who controlled her finances, forged her signature, and stole her home while she recovered from surgery 7 miles away. What she had was a pencil, 4 sheets of Magnolia watermark stationery, a butter knife's worth of rubber cement, and the unshakable belief that someone she loved would eventually open the right book. She built her case one hidden document at a time, knowing she might not live to see it found. The lesson is not that justice always wins. It doesn't. The lesson is that evidence, patience, and one person who refuses to stop looking can dismantle a machine that was built to be invisible. Eleanor Ashby was that person. She just needed Nora to finish the job. Some people leave you money. Some people leave you houses. My grandmother left me a box of old maps that a man in a charcoal suit threw onto her coffin because he thought they were worthless. They were worth $193,400 and a 4-year prison sentence and the restoration of 4 families' homes and a community that remembered it was supposed to protect its own. But mostly, they were worth the last line of her last letter. Open the atlas, sweetheart. I left the truth inside. If this story made you feel something anger, hope, the urge to check on someone you love, then it did what Eleanor would have wanted. Drop a comment and tell me, what's the most valuable thing someone ever left you that didn't look valuable at first? I read every single one. And if you haven't subscribed yet, do it now, because another story is already waiting, one that starts with a locked drawer, a missing receipt, and a grandmother who played chess while everyone else was playing checkers. I'll see you there.